Good afternoon. My name is Christina Strassfield, and I'm a museum director and chief curator here at Guildhall Museum. Before we start the talk, I would like to say a few housekeeping rules. Since it's a wonderful crowd, I thought I was going to get maybe 5 people because it's such a beautiful day outside. So I thank you all for being here. But just be careful when you are in this space and we move from piece to piece. Just be aware of the artwork behind you just so that we don't knock into anything. Also, there's no photography during the talk, and there's no photography during the run of the exhibition. And also, if you haven't signed in when you came into the gallery, if you can sign in on your way out, because we're collecting that information for grant writing and for funding sources. So just to sign in with your zip code is very helpful to us. I just want to let you know that we've been planning this exhibition for about a year and a half. And how many of you knew, of course, the name Richard Avedon? Everyone, okay? And what is the first thing that comes to mind when you hear Richard Avedon?
Fashion photography.
Fashion photography, exactly. So that's what everyone thought, you know, okay, we're going to be doing a Richard Avedon show. And when I was younger, I remember very clearly thinking, you know, hearing the name, knowing exactly who Richard Avedon was, but only from the fashion element of it. In the early 70s, there was a show at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and I remember I was young and in high school at the time, and going to see this show. And I remember being totally blown away by it, because it was fashion, but there were a lot of portraits in this exhibition. And it was probably the most amazing installation I had ever seen of photography at that time. And the reason why is they were large-scale photographs. Up until that time, most of the photographs that you saw in galleries and museums were about this size. You really did not see large ones. These were probably as large as our center frieze hanging wall. And they were also, sometimes they were photographs that were just presented, they were put on paper, and they were just flowing down. So the bottoms of them would just curl, basically almost touching the bottom of the floor. It was a totally, completely unique way. And this was all Richard Avedon. These were his ideas. This is the way he wanted to present it. So I got to learn a little bit more about Avedon through that show. And then in the early 90s, there was another show at the Metropolitan, which he did on the American West, a series that he had done, where he went out and he took photographs of a number of people, and then some of them are in this exhibition, because he wanted to capture what the American West was. Again, learning more about Richard Avedon. So we also saw at that time that he had done a lot of other portraits, and he was very much interested in politics and everything that was going on, social causes. So when I wanted to do this exhibition, I decided that the point was, let's do a little bit of everything. Let's really incorporate the fashion, let's incorporate the celebrity, let's incorporate the social media and all of, the social causes that he was involved with. So the talk today, and I know that some of you were at Mia Feynman's talk 2 weeks ago, so you're going to hear some similar things, but I hope you'll learn a little bit more about the social causes that we're going to talk about. The first stop is going to be this portrait by James Baldwin, which was done in 1945. Does anybody know who James Baldwin? Yes. Okay, very good. Okay, a writer, a person who did a lot with social causes. What's so interesting is that James Baldwin and Richard Avedon went to high school together at DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx. So it's kind of an interesting thing. James Baldwin and Richard Avedon were on the newspaper together. Okay, they wrote for the paper together. Richard also did photographs, and I'm supposed to not call him Richard because he always went by Dick Avedon, but since I never met him, I always feel like it's very awkward to say Dick because I did not know him. So hopefully I'll call him Avedon from now on. But they were very close and they were friends. A question that I had for James Martin, who was the executive director at the time, who's the current executive director, when I was beginning to talk about the show, I said, well, they were friends in school. But remember, this was the 1940s. I said, were they friends outside of school? And James had a wonderful story, and Hilton Alls repeated it when we had our panel discussion. He said that James came to Richard Avedon's house, and he went down in the Bronx, and he went to the ground floor where the doorman was. And the doorman said, well, no, you have to go through the back elevator up to the apartment. Okay? So he took the back elevator up to the apartment. And the story goes that Richard's mother took him downstairs and basically told the doorman, no way. You know, and said from now on you will always come up from the front and you will never do that again. So again, his background, what he was learning at home, he, you know, was they were talking the talk and they were walking the walk, which I think is really, really important. They became very close and they stayed close, and they actually did a book together called Nothing Personal. And there's going to be a show at Pace Gallery in the city, and Hilton Alls is actually doing the forward for it. Hilton Alls is the art critic for the New Yorker, and he also is a specialist on James Baldwin. And basically it was an essay by James Baldwin where he talks about all the inequities of what's happening in the United States at that time. And the photographs were all by Richard Avedon. And the last photograph, I'm going to show you in the other gallery when we get to that point, is an inspirational photograph, like things are going to get better. But you could imagine at that time, how do you think it was received? Not very positively. You know, it was like, oh my goodness, like how could you be saying these things? How could you be, you know, being negative about the United States? So James Baldwin ended up going in 1948 and moving to Paris and living there full time. He felt that his sexual orientation, as well as his race, was not really looked upon there, and that he was really much more accepted. And he lived his life there and really enjoyed it. He would come back and forth. He would also he was involved with the Vietnam War and a number of other political situations, and he would write about that extensively. But he felt that he was better off living there. So again, the whole thing was that Richard Avedon was aware of all these causes. He was involved. He did not want to shy away from them. You know, the publication was something that he knew was probably not going to be well received, but yet he went forward with it anyway. And I think it's going to be very interesting to see Hilton Alls's introduction to the new book, and I'm looking forward to that show myself, just to see those works in person and to really, if you have a chance to read it, you can read it. The essay is online, but I think it really shows you where he was coming from and where he was going. Our next stop is going to be this beautiful Marian Anderson. I think many of you probably know that Mary Anderson, world-renowned opera singer. This particular one was done in 1955. And when you look at this portrait, think of 1955, okay? Think of women's hair in 1955. Think of the social mores in 1955, okay? And when you look at this, do you think 1955?
No.
Not at all. Okay, Marian Anderson was one of the first, she was the first African-American woman to actually, opera singer to perform at the Metropolitan Opera. But what was very controversial, and I always get this is my cheat sheet because I never remember dates very well. In 1939, she was supposed to sing at the, sorry, I always get the name wrong. Constitution Hall. She was supposed to sing at Constitution Hall. And Constitution Hall is owned by the Daughters of the American Revolution. And what happened was the Daughters of the American Revolution said, no, we are not going to let an African-American woman sing. That was the sole reason. They were not going to let her sing. So Eleanor Roosevelt heard about this and was furious. She was a member of the Daughters of the American Revolution. She resigned from her, from being a member. And what she did was she formulated an opportunity for Mary to sing at the Lincoln Memorial, and it was on Easter Sunday. And it was viewed by 75 million people came there. And it was also, it was broadcast live so people could hear it as well. So you could imagine, what an opportunity. This woman being denied was just unbelievable. How could they do this? But this is what the country was like at that time. Later, she got to sing at Constitution Hall about 6 times. She also sang for presidents' inaugurations. But when Mia Feynman was talking about this portrait, and when you look at it, it's one of my favorites. We picked it as the card for the invitation. Is that she said that she embodied music. And I think when you're looking at it, she's singing, she's poised, her eyes are closed, she's like in awe and in rapture. The music is within her. And when I first saw her, I said it was her. She was the muse. She was the music muse, and she's just incorporating it all. What I love about this is also, she's wearing beads. Okay, she's not wearing pearls. And it's kind of interesting because there are other formal portraits that he took of her where she's wearing, a traditional dress, and she's wearing the pearls, and her hair is coiffed in a very unusual way. And this one is really capturing her in full force. It could be the costume of the opera, but I'm not quite sure about that because that wasn't really confirmed or not. So again, caught in the music, the hair flowing, the energy, the mouth open, and again, the music just pouring out of her. I think there's a tremendous energy and a sense to it. Quite different when you're thinking about what we saw, the James Baldwin portrait, which is a very close-up front and central image just of him capturing him. Mia Feynman also said that Avedon would take the eyes and make the eyes a little dark, the pupil a little darker and a little wider, and the eyes a little whiter in that. And so it's kind of interesting when you're looking at that one, he's really looking directly out at your soul in one way. And I think this one is slightly different because she's caught up in the moment, caught up in the music, caught up in just the energy of the sounds. So I love this one. We're gonna go to that one next. I'm sorry, here. That probably you recognize is probably the most famous image by Richard Avedon. It's one of the top 100 photographs of all time, according to many, many different polls. So we're not going to talk about that because that's the fashion I'm doing it, but it is a beautiful image. We're going to talk about the three that we see right here. So what do you notice in these three images that all of the images have? Guns. Guns, okay. In 2004, Richard Avedon was doing a series on democracy for the New York Magazine. And he wanted to see where America was and what was happening politically, what were the issues that people were talking about. And he went all the way around the country, meeting with different people and photographing different people. This particular piece was done about a week before he passed away. And what we have, and I'm going to use my cheat sheet again, this is Travis Mayer, his wife, and their child. And this was taken at a gun show in Nevada. Now, Richard Avedon was a person who was clearly against carrying guns. He didn't believe in it, but he wanted to find out why people across America felt the need to have guns and what was the point of this. And it's kind of interesting because the advertisements for this gun show are like, bring the family, like it's a family event, like it's a two-day event that still goes on today. Bring the kids, bring everyone, so that you can get, you can celebrate with them or be involved with them, and then you can leave with a gun so you have your protection if you need it. So it's kind of interesting. He went with the idea in mind what he wanted to photograph, which is kind of interesting. He wanted to get a family with children, so he had this in his mind, and he was walking around the fair and found this couple and said to them that this is what he wanted to do and would they be willing to do it. Just kind of an interesting, idea. And normally I thought he would just go there and he would just see someone and he would be inspired. But no, he had it all conceived ahead of time and then found the people to fit within that context, which is a kind of interesting. The middle picture is David Brother, and this was done in 1969. So again, he was dealing with those issues again about guns and First and Second Amendment rights, but at the same time, decades earlier in this case. Now, David was the person who was involved with, and I'm going to get this right, the All African People's Revolutionary Party, and also involved with the Black Panthers. And so again, your Second Amendment rights. Do you want to defend your family? Do you want to give it to people who feel that they want to defend their rights as well? And then we're going to go see the neo-Nazis and the Nazis in the other room. Again, do you give them their rights, their Second Amendment rights? Do you want them to have guns? So these are all things that you're thinking about, and he's placing them in a certain context there. And there is some soldiers from Fort Hood. And Fort Hood is the largest military complex in the United States. Again, so do you want our military to have guns? Do you want our military to protect us? Do you want all people, whether you agree with their political affiliations or not, do you want them to have guns? And do you want to have guns for self-defense? So three completely. This is done in 2004, and this one was done in 2004, but this was 1969. So the difference, these were issues that he was dealing with even earlier, decades earlier in the 70s. So it's kind of interesting how he framed it and what he was thinking about when he did that. So we're going to go see the other room. So when I was talking about the other room with Marian Anderson, that was 1955. This, The Daughters of the American Revolution, is 1963. So again, when I was telling you about the hair and the coiffing and the clothing. So this is what I'm thinking about. Look at the juxtaposition of that portrait of Marian Anderson, and this is the Daughters of the American Revolution. What's kind of interesting is that when he did this portrait, there was a sitting. And what's wonderful is if you have time, we have a book right by the reception desk, and there's outtakes from pretty much all of these photo shoots, which is always interesting, because clearly this was either before the formal picture was taken or after the formal picture was taken, which is kind of interesting, because again, only one woman is looking directly out at us. The rest are all talking, or they're thinking about it, or it's about to happen, or has just happened, and they're just getting together. What's interesting is they're all wearing their sashes, they're all very proud, they all have their various medals on, they also have little pins that are helping to anchor their sashes to their gowns. It's very formal and very stiff. And what kind of a statement do you think he's making about these women? Do you think he's on their side that they did not let Marian Anderson? No way. And I think it comes across in such a wonderful, comical, almost whimsical way. I mean, he's making his own statement when you're looking at this particular image, and I think it's just, again, it's just really quite amazing. Also, what's interesting is that most of the images that you're going to be seeing here, the images are usually front and central. The person is looking directly out at us. In this case, the central figure has her back turned against us, okay? So again, we can always read something into it. I always encourage people, you're bringing yourself into all of these photographs. You're bringing yourself into all the artwork that you see. So my feeling when I first saw it was like, well, she has her, she really has her back turned against really all of America. She's really not aware of what's really going on in America at this time, in this place, And I think that over the years now, the Daughters of the American Revolution have made efforts to bring in all different people and acknowledge everyone who truly belongs. But again, for the longest period of time, that was not the case. So I think he was capturing that moment and that time in this particular image. Again, just wonderful. And in some of the other ones, you're going to see that other people are looking out in different directions. It's kind of an interesting dynamics there, and just capturing all of those. Look at her eyes, looking out the other way. Who knows what she's thinking and what's going on there. Okay, how many of you know who Julian Bond is? Okay, wonderful. Okay, in 1960, this one was done in 1963, and Julian Bond was the head of the Students for Nonviolent Coordinating Committee at North Carolina. He was also Georgia State Legislature. He won the Georgia State Legislature, and for 2 years, they would not let him serve. They would not let him take his seat. Can you believe that? He won the election. They would not let him take his seat. It's just, it's bizarre when you hear all this stuff. I was talking to someone who was much younger, and, again, they can't even comprehend it. We've lived through a number of things. Not through everything, but we've lived through a number of these things. But when you hear that, and you say you won the election and you were not allowed to actually sit, to me, it's beyond it. This person was like, that can't be, and I was like, no. In the 1960s.
And it's coming back. I mean, it's not, okay. So this struggle is not over yet.
It's not over at all. Also, he was the head of, for the longest time he was the head of the Southern Poverty Law, and he was also the head of the NAACP. I actually also know Julian Bond because he was an advocate for the Barnes collection in Philadelphia, because he was on their board, and there's a wonderful film on the Barnes collection where he talks all about how all of these people just stole the Barnes collection away from what Mr. Barnes originally wanted. And I thought, he was the most eloquent speaker in that. So this shows him when he's quite young. I think till the end of his life he was an extremely handsome man. And I think just setting him off like that in this particular group. He's the only one sort of really in clear focus. And you look at the rest are a little bit blurred out, but his vision and his standing out alone in the crowd, I think is clearly what he's trying to say there. And I think it comes across so beautifully in this particular work there. Next to him, I think, is an amazing portrait, and this is William Casby, and this was done in 1963. Now, William Casby, this picture was taken for the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. He was born in 1857, and he was one of the oldest living slaves. He was born into slavery, and he was 106 years old when this picture was taken. And it's so interesting because he was actually paid. He was paid $25 to have his picture taken. And all the letters that Avedon sent to him are all documented. So he would pay his sitters because he felt that their time was important. And there's this wonderful letter where he's explaining, I want to come and I want to take your picture, and the documentation is all there. And during this sitting, there's other pictures where they show Mr. Casby with his whole generation, his children and his grandchildren and his great-grandchildren all around him, and they are really, again, very beautiful and moving portraits, again, because from generation to generation, look what he saw, and look at the changes that were there. And he was very positive because he said, I've seen changes, because they were talking to him about the Jim Crow and what was still happening. And he said, I've seen changes and it's gonna get better. So there was a positive energy to it. I love the portrait which showed the generations because I thought that was so touching and so moving that he was able to share his knowledge of what had happened to him, what he grew up in, and all the changes that he saw in his lifetime. You know, you never want history to repeat itself, so you have to really share what you know and what knowledge you know to your children, to your grandchildren, to everyone who's around, to the whole world, so that we never forget what has happened here. So again, really, again, a very, very strong, very, very moving, really up close, very, again, right in your face. He's there. He's there for all eternity. They want you to remember this. So again, really, really extraordinary work. We're going to swing by here to one that's always very hard for me. I think sometimes it's very hard to see certain images. This is George Lincoln Rockwell, who was the founder of the American Nazi movement. And this one was done in 1963. In 1959 is when Rockwell, he's the one in the center here, he came up with the World Union of Free Enterprise of National Socialists, which then became the American Nazi movement. He actually started out as just an average person. He was at Brown University, went there for 2 years, did not believe in equality of people, left after 2 years, went into the armed services. In the armed services, he came across the literature of Hitler, and he became enamored with this, and then throughout his life, then decided that this is what he wanted to do. It's interesting that the man to the right, one of the people who was one of his followers originally, got disenchanted with him and ended up being the one who ended up killing him. The one on the right here. It's kind of interesting. He's the one by the American flag. He's the one, it's kind of interesting. Look, unbeknownst, he's the one with the American flag right next to him there. But they're sitting there in their uniforms again. You know, do they have the right to carry weapons? Again, we're going to bring it back forward from the other side there. You know, your Second Amendment rights, you know, do you want people like this to have, you know, these are all issues that he was again bringing forward and bringing to their mind. What is this? He also did some portraits of just Rockwell himself, you know, in looking straight out at you in the Nazi uniform that, you know, he chose that those were not the ones he wanted. This was the prime one that he felt was the strongest. Again, the whole slogan, white man fight, smash the black revolution now. You know, you just see this, and for me, it's like, it's very hard, you know, and you're like, oh my gosh. But it's what is out there, unfortunately, and this, you know, we've seen terrible things even here, you know, the Ku Klux Klan sending things out, even to this day. So it's something that is aware that we should constantly be aware of what people are thinking, and be aware and be vigilant, because you don't want things like that to happen again. Let's move down to the other end. Now, this particular one is called Anne Schwenner, Fannie Lee Chani, and Carol Goodman. These were the mothers of the slain civil rights workers, and this particular one was done in 1975. So again, the young men were killed in 1964. They were out trying to register voters. And when you're looking at this particular picture, it's funny because we've had a number of different Avedon scholars come in, and they were all blown away because some of them had said, I've never seen this picture. I didn't even know it existed. So when you're looking at it, it's the three mothers who actually all carried out their children's legacy. They all were involved after their children were slain, involved in doing fundraising, in starting foundations, and really supporting what their children believed in so that their lives and their legacy would live on over and over again. It's an interesting picture because, again, they're caught in conversation. These two are caught in conversation, but this woman in the middle here is not. She almost looks like she's thinking about something else. Again, so what is she thinking about? Is she part of this conversation? There are other photographs, obviously, that we've seen where there is much more interaction among the three, but for some reason, Richard Avedon chose this one. Why? I'm not quite sure, but it's kind of interesting. Is she thinking about her child? Is she thinking about something else? Or is she talking about what's really still happening? You know, there wasn't still, you know, there's still not total equality. Does she still feel alienated from these two women, these two white women as an African-American woman? Kind of an interesting thought, you know, you're looking at it. Again, the cutting off of the images. So they don't have the border, the large border around them, what we see in some of the other images there. It's a very close cropped. You're right there in there, right there in there with them. Very, very much jarring, part of the conversation. What is their conversation? Can we be privy to that conversation? Those are all thoughts that are kind of interesting to me when I'm looking at this particular photograph. The next one, you're all going to recognize. Who's this? Malcolm X, okay? Now, Malcolm X, this one was taken in 1963, so 2 years before he was assassinated. What's interesting about this one is that, again, James Baldwin actually was the one who facilitated his getting the opportunity to photograph Malcolm X. He was the go-between to get that coordinated. You're looking at this particular photograph, and all the other ones from the sitting are, again, very traditional. They're not blurred. They're, you know, your standard portraits has looking out at you, some three-quarter views, but yet this is the one that he chose. And again, I feel that it almost has an ethereal quality to it when you're looking at this particular one. You don't see his eyes. Okay, his eyes are almost shaded. The blurred, like he's in motion, like he's in action, he's doing something, he's involved in something. And again, just like the Marian Anderson, it's not really totally centered. It's slightly askew. So when you're looking at that, it's kind of an interesting interpretation. Why that? Why that particular one? Yet I feel it's like so strong when you're looking at that one. And it's funny because the traditional portraits are really quite beautiful, and they're like sort of headshots that you would imagine a CEO having, yet he saw him differently. And I almost feel like he saw him in a special way. He felt like he couldn't represent him just the way he's represented other people. He wanted to do something totally different and something totally unique. So that's why he did that. Okay, we're getting smaller and smaller as we get to this corner here. This is a small image, and it's called The Members of the Young Lords. And I'm going to read the names again. How many of you know Pablo Guzman? Have you heard the name? Okay, he is the newscaster. This was Pablo Guzman here when he was a young man. The other one is Gloria Gonzalez, Juan Gonzalez, who ended up writing for the New York Post, and Denise Oliver. And this was in New York in 1971. And they were part of a group called the Young Lords. And the Young Lords was a group of young people who wanted to get together, and they wanted to really help fix the barrio, the El Barrio area of New York, which was where the Puerto Rican community was basically living at that time. They wanted to help with daycare. They wanted to help with trash collection. They wanted to help bring forward police protection to the area. So they were very much involved in making changes. They were the young sort of revolutionaries of their time, really trying to do only good. But the group got together, and then the group became politicized because they ended up wanting, part of the group ended up wanting to splinter off and wanted to help have Puerto Rico become free and independent. So then that group splintered off in another different area, and so that they all fell into various places. But it's kind of interesting because when I first saw it, and I didn't recognize the names, I didn't see the names actually, I just saw the title Young Lords. I thought they were like a music group, you know, they're posed there, kind of casual, you know, almost like you would see on a record, I'm dating myself, like a record album cover, right? Like they're all sitting there, they're kind of dressed really cool, they look like they're interesting people together. And so again, kind of a different presentation that we've seen from some of the other works here. This woman actually is cut off. She's, you know, only see part of her there. But again, they're still looking out at you, they're engaging you, they want to show change. So he was really wanting to document everyone who was out there, anyone who was doing anything that he also believed in. And I forgot to mention this, when he was, they were talking about the Ezra Pound, where Ezra Pound was an anti-Semite, and Mia Feynman talked about it. She said that as soon as before he started the sitting, he said to him, I just want you to know that I'm Jewish, so he was like putting it out there. He wanted to explain who he was, what he was about, so the person knew. So again, if he believed in something, he would clearly document it and show and go forward, and even if he didn't believe, he, obviously with the Nazis or something, but he wanted to document it and show what was going on at this time. This one, again, a name, I was looking at it, Florence Kennedy, and at first I thought, oh, is this the woman who was in the Olympics? But it's not. Florence Kennedy she was a civil rights lawyer, and this was done in 1969. She was one of those people who, unfortunately, just like Malcolm X, the Ku Klux Klan, when she was growing up, burned her house, just as they had done with Malcolm X, and she ended up becoming a lawyer. She applied to Columbia Law School, and was denied, and she sued Columbia. And they said, oh, we're not denying you because you're black, we're denying you because you're a woman. So she went back and sued them. She went back and sued them again. And she got into that class. She was the one of 6 women, the first woman to graduate from Columbia Law. And she also became very an advocate for women's rights. And so there she is, she's wearing the woman's symbol there. But it's kind of interesting, again, in your face, talking out. Love the way they've captured an energy and an emotion and a feeling to this. So again, just look at the difference that we see here, all the different varieties. The mothers, Malcolm X, the young lords, and Florence Kennedy. Completely different personas, and he's capturing each one in their essence. They're completely in that particular work. Okay, we're going to go over to the other and see one last piece. You knew her? Oh my gosh, that's great.
He's a friend of my brother-in-law who went to Columbia, evidently. I think he might have gone with her, but that's how we were accompanied. She was quite a dynamic person.
Oh, I love that. How wonderful. That's great. I love it. So the last piece that I'm going to talk about is this portrait of Peter Orlovsky and Allen Ginsberg, which was done in 1963. So we've seen, civil rights, women's rights, political freedoms, and in this case, this is a wonderful portrait of a couple who were together for many, many years. Avedon was close friends with both of them, and they did a book together, in fact, where it was Ginsberg's writings and Avedon's photographs. And it's kind of interesting because, again, here he's celebrating their marriage together. They were together, they weren't married, but they were together for a number of years. So they're actually being a couple together. And again, going one step further, they're a homosexual couple showing them nude. And it's just wonderful, the freedom to do this. And when we were working with the Richard Avedon, and she said, they were like, is your audience going to get offended? And we're like, no, they're not going to get offended. They're going to totally understand and really want to celebrate this wonderful portrait of a couple together, embracing everything. And again, remember, 63 when this was published, okay? A totally different time when not everyone was accepting, what was happening, the reality of what was happening. So again, really wonderful. Again, what I love about this one is, again, they're looking out at you directly with their gaze. There's an energy, there's a love together as a couple, as a unit, accepting us, accepting all over. So I hope that you really had a chance to understand that Avedon was much more than just a fashion photographer, much more than just a photographer. He was a person who was passionate about his political views, about what was happening, aware of so much happening, whether it was the art world and Andy Warhol or what was happening in society today. It was really a fascinating exposure and experience for him to document all that information. If you have a chance, there is a wonderful film that we showed at on Richard Avedon called oh my gosh, what's the name of the film? Anyway, if you look up the Richard Avedon film, please do, because it's really a wonderful, I think they touch on a lot of different issues, but I think it captures him so beautifully that I really recommend that you have a chance to see it. And we do have someone here, we have two people here who actually had met Richard Avedon. And so I was hoping that they could also, would you like to come up? Because we want you to share some of your anecdotes and explain to everyone who you are here.
Well, I was in the advertising business for a long time, from print into television. And so at one point I went to see Dick, asked him if he wanted me to represent him, because I represented photographers at that time. And he said, it's too late, I've already got Laura Pinellas, so I can't have you represent me. Anyway, at one point, we were all doing television. And at one point, Young and Rubicam, one of the largest agencies, advertising agencies in the world, had put out what they called a bidding form that we would all bid our commercials on, and what we would try to get the job based on that price. And the bidding form was based on Procter & Gamble's desires. And at that point, none of us wanted to bid on a Procter & Gamble bid form because it had nothing to do with the way we did our work and the way we worked out the expenses and how we would come pick out with some sort of a profit. And what it was an infringement upon us. And so we all refused to bid. And so they were going around us. We had an association called the Association of Independent Commercial Producers, of which I was one of the founding members, which now has offices around the country. Anyway, at that point, they had a job for Richard Avedon. And they called in Laura Pinellas, at that time, who was his representative, and they asked Laura to bid on his job. And it turned out that Richard had heard about the situation we had with them in terms of not bidding, and Richard refused to bid. And because Richard refused to bid, Young and Rubicam stopped using the bid form, and he put it to bed. So that was, again, his social...
Yes, huh?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you for sharing.
Not at all.
Thank you again, and please take a look around. If you have any questions, I'm here to answer whatever I can. Thank you.
I met him, but actually never ago. I met him.
Yes, yeah, I knew.
No.